we have Sudeep George, VP of Engineering at iMerit. iMerit is a data annotations services company that provides the platform and the people needed to reliably annotate large data sets. They work with different types of data sets, including computer vision and natural language. Previously, Sudeep was the co-founder of Tonbo Imaging, where he helped design, develop, and manufacture state-of-the-art imaging systems around the design ethos of edge-based processing and connectivity. Super excited to have you, Sudeep, and welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Rohit. Really excited to be here on this platform, having this conversation with you. Quick introduction about myself, just adding to what you've already stated. I come from a computational imaging background, so I've been building a lot of computer vision-based products, and I've been trying to extract data out of sensors for a very long time, right? And that is a space that has evolved and reached a point of maturity now. At iMerit, my focus is on the next layer. So you have all the sensor data across different modalities. What do you do with it? How do you make sure that you use this data in the right way so that you can help build the most optimal and the most best performing AI models? And that's the service that we provide at iMerit, where we provide productized data services. We help our customers in building ML models and AI solutions that help them to be the best in their business. And the kind of customers that we work with span the entire gamut of the AI landscape, right? So we've got customers who are building self-driving cars. We've got folks in the medical imaging space. We've got people working on document AI, satellite imaging. So very different verticals. And each customer obviously has a very unique problem statement that they are trying to solve. So our focus is on helping them achieve their goals. Our USP is in helping our customers by providing them with high quality annotated data at scale. And that's where our entire focus is. iMerit is based out of a couple of locations across the globe. We've got offices in India, US, and Europe. We're about 5,000 people strong. A large segment of this workforce are essentially subject matter experts. They've been working on these different models, and they've been working on these different industries, and so they kind of understand the context and the nuances specific to each domain. And the focus for each of these groups is to kind of make sure that within that specific domain or area that they are operating, they help bring their subject matter expertise and help the customers in understanding all the edge cases that can typically come up in most of these problem statements. So that's where iMerit is focused on, and it's.
Thanks for that introduction, Sudeep. I would love to start off, about iMerit and how did your journey with iMerit start? I remember it was at least 3 or 4 years ago when we first spoke, but would love to understand, how did iMerit start and where is it heading? Like with all these generative AI based use cases and applications disrupting the whole AI industry. I would love to learn where it's heading as well.
Sure. So iMerit started off about 10 years back. It is founded by Radha Basu. The focus has always been to help build better AI systems and to provide value-added services around it. So we've been essentially working with the industry as it has matured from a very nascent stage to what we see today, where we have AI basically permeating various domains, various industries. And more importantly, we are now at this cusp of, hey, there's generative AI and there's a lot of magic happening. So how do you actually build AI systems given these new capabilities? So iMerit's essential focus has always been around providing high quality data. As a company, I think we have probably annotated close to 2 billion data points. So that's given us a lot of experience, right? And we work with this entire range of customers that we've been collaborating with. And so we understand what their needs are, but more importantly, we are also looking at how we can provide value back to them, right? Like, for example, if you look at the generative AI space today, there is still a need for high quality data, right?
Right.
Most of the foundational models that you look at have essentially been built on very well labeled data. But more importantly, a lot of subject matter expertise is also required because you have this whole layer of human feedback that is very essential to improve these foundational models. So
Right.
that's where iMerit's strength lies. In fact, we just released a state of MLOps report a couple of weeks back, and across the entire spectrum of respondents, high quality data and ability to handle edge cases and dire need for providing subject matter expertise. That's what's coming out from the market, right? So we seem to be at the right place with these very essential skills, and that's how we're kind of moving along. There are, of course, challenges. The primary challenge being, how do we keep up with the pace of development, right?
Right.
To give you an example, I was just reading yesterday that apparently there were 100 plus ML papers released on archive in a single day, probably 2 days back, right? Wow. So that's the pace of development. Right. That's the speed at which the industry is moving. So our entire focus is to kind of make sure that we are keeping pace with it. We are understanding how how to kind of navigate these changes, and some of them work out, some don't. And right. Our challenge is in making sure we are able to understand and keep pace with these changes.
Got it. I still remember, I think it was 2017, 18, and then even till date, I think data annotation and the quality of data annotation and speed is still the most complex part of the whole model development workflow. I think that's it's easier to kind of develop the model as such in terms of the architecture, etc. But I think the heavy moving work is data annotations. How big is the iMerit team? How many annotators are at any point in time working to annotate these data sets?
So we've got close to around 5,000 folks bringing in various levels of subject matter expertise. They work on different problem statements. They are essentially multimodal in nature. So we're working on text, images, LiDAR, point clouds, radar, audio. So the entire landscape, we have various customers and various problem statements that we are solving there. And our workforce actually essentially brings in their capability, brings in their strengths in terms of understanding the problem statement, and also making sure that we not only just annotate data, we are also trying to help the customers in solving the problem of the long tail, which is essentially handling edge cases and making sure that is not only annotated but also validated when these models are being released.
Right. Got it. There's been a lot of changes in the whole machine learning field. Of course, the generative boom that has come in over the last 1 year or so. How is the data annotation space changed because of these generative models? From two angles: the data required to create such models and the use of these models in annotating data faster and more accurately.
Yeah, so essentially the problem statement for data annotation essentially remains the same. The context has changed a bit. Data annotation has primarily been all about data collection, data curation, subject matter expertise, also known as human in the loop, and validation, right? So with all of this in these requirements, we've been serving a lot of customers in the traditional model building space, which is around CNNs and NLP-based systems. Now, when you look at generative AI, the requirement is primarily around curation. Companies are requiring that we help them in slicing the data, understanding the data better, cleaning it up, removing the noise from the data. So it's not just pure annotation; it's also dataset management, dataset search. So there are cases where we are creating embeddings and vectors out of the data that's coming our way, helping the customers with various insights around that data, which help them in turn decide what data is going to be used for their specific purposes. And on the other end of the spectrum is the human feedback. So traditionally, human feedback has always been about quality, kind of making sure that there's a human who's looking at the output of a model and confirming that it's working as per expectation. Here in generative AI, we are taking it to the next level where the human is also helping to train the model, right? To train the AI system, providing human feedback, telling the model that, hey, you know what, you could have worded this better. You could have, added a little more realism to this part of the image. This looks really great. This looks bad. Kind of working with the model and making sure that we're giving the feedback so that the model generates better output.
Right.
This essentially means folks have to be subject matter experts. So they have to bring in their expertise and say that I fully understand this requirement and the domain, and this is what needs to be improved, or this looks great, and you can just go ahead and use it. So that's one one shift that I'm seeing with the recent changes. Another important part is the whole data part of the equation, right? Traditionally, companies have always struggled to get data to kind of have a starting point in terms of building their models. But today, that's not the case. So I call it as, it's a hot start problem now. So you can come in and you can very quickly get up and running.
Right.
Your focus is not about, how do you start with a POC, but it's more in terms of, hey, you have an MVP and I've quickly reached that MVP stage. Now, how do I start productizing it? How do I start customizing it to the various use cases that I may have? So that's the big shift that I'm seeing in space.
Got it. I was curious to learn about any drift between computer vision applications and NLP. Have you seen like more projects in NLP-based annotations, or is there some change there between CV and NLP?
So NLP is, with the advent of LLMs that are operating at this level of accuracy and quality, NLP is definitely impacted, right? So I think a lot of companies in the NLP space are definitely relooking at how they are building their systems. I see a lot of change in those requirements. This is no longer the, let's have some NER and NEL linkages in the data, but it's more about, hey, is this prompt really working well? Is this output good enough? What kind of feedback can you give? What kind of instruction set can you create? So those are some of the changes that I'm seeing in the NLP space. CV, not so much. I think most companies are still sticking to the traditional CNN route, and CNN is just a placeholder, or the traditional methods. I think the primary reasons are there's this whole computational complexity, right? In terms of how do you use generative AI for images. There is a lot of computational requirements around it. There's also the whole complexity of, hey, is this, really not touching on somebody's IP? How do I make sure that we're not infringing anything? So these are some of the complexities and challenges that I see in the CV space. And that's why companies are still, sticking to the traditional methods, but that's slowly changing, right? And I'm pretty sure in the next couple of months, given what we are seeing in terms of some of the releases, recent releases,
right?
Things
if I remember right, we needed like thousands and thousands of images of examples before we could train the model. I think that's drastically different right now. Very few examples, or exponentially lower number of examples are enough to kind of tell the model what is what. I think that probably is something that you're also seeing in the CV space.
Absolutely. So, Stable Diffusion just released the Excel 1.0 version. And I think one of the claims that they have made is that in 5 images, they can reach the level of realism that makes it very hard to distinguish between the actual image versus the generated image. So that's the level at which these AI systems are operating today. So there's definitely a lot of focus on making sure that you're having the right data. It's not a lot of data.
The right data.
It's quality versus quantity now.
Right.
So making sure you're getting a truly representative sample of all the different scenarios and edge cases. I think that's where the challenge is today.
Right. I think the long tail becomes even more important now because catching hold of each of these long tail is going to be more critical.
Exactly. And since, we're using the term generative, it's creating content, right? So you have to really cover all your bases. And that's where a lot of focus is on making sure that, hey, is this combination of prompts going to create a problem? Let's make sure that we are handling that particular scenario.
Right. Awesome. So before I drift on to the actual topic of this webinar, which is using synthetic data, how are you seeing companies respond to these, changes in AI? In terms of their prototyping, taking the product to market. I think you sit at a vantage point where you're able to see different types of industries and companies leveraging AI, being in the annotation space. So, a few thoughts on how are companies getting impacted, especially the traditional companies.
So I think, and I touched upon it briefly earlier, I think the biggest change is in how fast generative AI is enabling companies to move, right? The POC phase for many of these domains is extremely short now. So people are now talking about, hey, let me quickly build an MVP in a couple of months. Things that would normally take at least 6 months, we are now talking, in terms of 6 weeks.
Right.
So I think that's the biggest change. And that means that companies have to also be very sure that their focus is on validating that their systems are doing what they're supposed to, right? I mean, you can't just rely on an AI system to handle all the various nitty-gritties of your particular problem statement. You have to validate that. So I think the focus is now more on task validation rather than task execution. So what do I mean by task execution? It's like, putting together software components that could do a certain task. That's not so much of a problem as making sure that that particular software component is actually doing it the right way. And so companies are now focusing on how do they validate, how do they make sure that they are checking the quality of their work. And that's where, we're seeing a lot more traction. Quality analysis is definitely something that many companies are investigating. They're coming back and saying, hey, we've used this particular LLM, for example, to do, let's say, document knowledge indexing, right? Now, I want to validate this. Help me validate this, right? So those are some of the...
More than annotation itself, validating the model and it has become a bigger kind of requirement.
Yeah, I would say it's now not so much about the pure annotation in the sense, the traditional method of drawing a bounding box, but now it's about, was the bounding box drawn on the correct thing, right? Was it classified the correct way? So these are, the new topics of interest now. So that's where a lot of focus is.
Got it. And which industries are kind of getting disrupted the fastest from your point of view, like legal, autonomous? I think you work across different industries.
So, see, disruption, I always question whether it's disruption or transformation. Definitely there's changes in the air. But in terms of who are the immediate candidates for this change, I would say it's the companies in the creative space. It's companies in the interpretation space where, like, for example, legal, fintech, or even business analysts, right? It's so much easier to do your high-level pass on business analysis now. So that definitely is going to have an impact on many of these industries, right? How do they actually keep pace with these changes? I mean, a couple of years back, if you wanted to understand what a company is doing, you would have to spend quite some time to go through all their filings and reports and all the paperwork around that company. Today, it's a matter of just indexing it in a couple of minutes and then asking any question you want and getting pretty accurate answers.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, the same thing that you would be asking a business analyst, you can do that
Absolutely.
pretty
I
quickly
was,
now. So,
yeah, I mean, being the tax season, I was taking the help of, ChatGPT to like help me save some tax. I'm like, hey, this is all the stuff that I've spent on and earned. Help me kind of get a tax structure. I think the models will improve and get honed on to different countries' tax systems very soon. And you could have like a digital tax, CA for you, who could be.
absolutely. So, sometime back, Bloomberg, for example, released the Bloomberg GPT.
Right.
So they've got this huge corpus of data that they've collected over so many years, right? And Bloomberg being Bloomberg, they're pretty detailed in the information that they've collected.
Right.
So they built essentially a GPT-like system around their own data. They're offering it as a service to their customers. A great example of how a company has kept pace with the change, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, they kind of evolving with the latest breakthroughs in technology, but they're still making sure it's servicing their need. And I think that's a great example.
I think this brings us to the topic of new incumbents coming in. Do you think that the data that these large companies have is a moat that they kind of can carry on for long, or how do you look at this? Having access to a lot of proprietary data.
So it's no longer a moat for sure. It's an advantage, right? I don't think in some of these domains, especially language domains, data will continue to remain a moat in any way, right? It's an advantage. It gives you a head start, but at some point your competition is going to catch up with you. I think for many of these companies, and this is irrespective of whether you're a startup or an innovator or an established company, also known as an incumbent, right? Irrespective of your current state of business, this reliance on data as a moat may not hold true for very long. So then what do you do next, right? How do you use that data? And we just touched upon Bloomberg. Bloomberg is just one example, right? There are a bunch of these companies. There are companies who are now going and looking at, hey, we've got this whole corpus of information around how people code. GitHub, let's have Copilot, right? Yeah. So now they're looking at different ways in which they can use that data. Yeah. And I think these are new offerings which couldn't have happened probably last year or any time before that. But even with these new offerings, these companies are still trying to get that competitive advantage. So it's not about I have data. The moat is I have best used the data that I have.
How well you use your existing data. And that basically defines what kind of models are you building in-house and what kind of problems are you probably solving with these models.
Right.
Awesome.
And there's also the whole, I think one huge advantage that the startups have is their ability to be agile, right? And I know you're the expert on it, but that's exactly what is the strength, what brings out the strengths of the startup world, right? That you're able to quickly figure out, hey, what works, what doesn't work, make those changes. You're keeping pace with the R&D, and I think that's a huge advantage. Many big companies don't have that advantage because of various reasons. And that's definitely a strength to
right. I mean, it's hard as a large company to change momentum, and also even for Microsoft, even $1 billion market is not that lucrative to kind of go after, and that's what kind of helps startups just go after a slightly smaller market, but for a startup it's still large enough for them to grow. Awesome. So for the benefit of the audience, I moving towards synthetic data and then the use of synthetic data for annotations. I'll just quickly touch upon what is generative AI and what is synthetic AI or synthetic data. So generative AI is basically any model or pipeline that generates a type of data. It could be text, it could be images, it could be 3D models, it could be DNA sequence. It applies to almost every kind of data that exists out there. You'll of course have to customize the model to generate those data sets. And it usually involves a prompt, which is kind of become like the new GUI of sorts, where you given a prompt and it does accordingly, like give me 10 samples of drug that could solve this cancer or that could cure this cancer. And then you also give some context to it, like you give these are the 4 existing drugs that already kind of work well, can you give me 10 more kind of sequences. So those are the kind of applications, but being the early days of generative AI, we are seeing a lot of use cases on the images and text side. But personally, I feel this will evolve to every aspect of the world, including autonomous vehicles, medical AI, education, and all these sectors. So that's generative AI for the audience. And synthetic data is data that has been created by these models, right? Or similar pipelines. Data sets that did not weren't created by humans directly, like by taking a photograph, but they wrote in a prompt and created that image. It could be a person or a face that has never existed. It could be a creature that never existed, but you use generative AI to create some form of data. And that's basically synthetic data. And sometimes synthetic data can be sent back to the model to reinforce it, improve it, either the same model or a different model. A classic example would be, if I'm not wrong, Alpaca, which was trained on ChatGPT's output on Llama model, right? So that's a classic use case of synthetic data being used for improving an open source existing model. So having given that context, Sudeep, so how is this kind of changing iMerit's requirements or clients' requirements to iMerit? Like, are you seeing a lot of requests for annotating synthetic data or creating synthetic data to reinforce the annotations? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think the challenge for most companies in the AI space, remains the same across a couple of factors. One of that is, hey, is there any bias in the way your system operates? Do you handle as many scenarios as you should be handling? I think those problems continue to exist. So even if you have the most sophisticated foundational model, there are black holes where problems do happen. So when customers work with us, they also leverage some of our services around helping them solve edge cases, right? So since we work in most cases, we are the first pair of eyes on the data, right? So we understand where are the gaps in your data. We curate this data for you. And once you start building your systems, we can also figure out, hey, these are some of the scenarios that you aren't covering. So, these are
Would
edge
you be able
cases.
to give us an example of such an instance, maybe not to a specific client, but a use case that if you could highlight?
Sure. So let's say you're an automotive customer and you go around collecting road data. So you're driving around collecting road data, and there is this particular scenario of a vehicle coming in front of you under certain lighting conditions, and you would have probably collected data for that particular scenario. But the challenge is in making sure that your model is not only able to handle that scenario, it's able to perform similarly when it's raining, when it is a completely different lighting condition, like going from day to night. You need to validate that the model can handle all of that. And that is where, companies come to us and say, hey, can you help us in figuring out this edge case? And kind of providing us data to allow us to handle that particular edge case. That's where synthetic data comes in, right? So we use a variety of traditional synthetic data creation methods or even the generative AI methods to help our customers with giving them data around these edge cases. And this data is used for either model development or it's used for model validation, also known as anomaly testing, right? So what you would do is you would work with the customer and say, hey, you know what, these are some of the scenarios that we think could be problematic for your particular use case. And we're telling this because we have this breadth and depth of experience. We'll help generate the use cases, and then let's test and see how your model performs, right? And how does that help the customer? If you talk about self-driving car companies, the math is that in order for them to really operate at 99% accuracy, and I'm not going into the decimals, but let's leave it at 99, it literally requires tens of billions of road miles to be covered. And this is not, somebody driving on a highway in a remote location. This is data that has to be captured when you're in the whole chaos of, city traffic and various other scenarios. So to collect this data is virtually impossible for many of these companies, given the fact that, it's just going to take so much time and so much cost. So that's where many of the top-notch self-driving car companies have invested from a long time. They've been investing in building simulations and using synthetic data to not only train but also validate their models. And we kind of continue to work with many of these companies and many other newer companies in kind of giving them solutions around the space. So that is one area. The second area would be, let's say you have an LLM model and you want to train it better. You gave this great example of Alpaca, right? Now, Alpaca was essentially, they took what is called as a self-instruct seed data set. So this is an open source data set, extremely small. And then they used an OpenAI offering to kind of build upon that. But you can't just go and say, okay, OpenAI, these are the 10 prompts. Now go and give me generate data, and I'm going to just take that data. You need people who really understand what is it that you're trying to solve. And that is where, again, you get the subject matter expertise. And that's where companies come to us and say, generate this data, but also validate this data, right? Make sure it meets these specific requirements.
Got it.
And once you have validated, give it to us so that we can start building our models. So these are some examples. There are many others, right? I mean, I could go into the audio space where, given the the kind of developments we're seeing there, this whole work around converting audio to text is like, it's going through literally a revolution, right? So for the same piece of audio, you can generate text in different languages. Wow. Right? So you get an audio piece, you convert it into, you translate it into text, and then you make it multilingual. And you use this entire corpus of training material to improve your model.
Right, right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Any specific models that you would like to highlight that is being used a lot, or at least tried a lot inside iMerit, and which is kind of giving you positive results to help you kind of annotate?
So we do use LLMs. We use Alpaca. We use Llama 2, which just got released. Obviously, for us, the biggest constraint when we're using an LLM is your data secure, right? So that becomes the number one focus when we're using any of these generative AI techniques. So we use only those solutions that make sure that there is complete data security, as well as, there's an ability for you to kind of control the content. You don't want to generate content that you don't know, that doesn't really help your use case, right? So you want to make sure that you're controlling what is being generated. So in the LLM space, we use Llama and Alpaca for certain scenarios. In the CV space, we use SAM and DINO. So SAM and DINO are offerings from Meta. SAM is a foundational model that can be used for creating segmentation. It just creates the mass, right? And DINO is a even bigger model which helps in a lot of downstream analysis, right? So it could run on your data, understand what the video is all about. It can give you contextual information. It can give you image level information. It could give you pixel level information. So you get a lot of these downstream capabilities when you're using many of these models. And I think that we use this as an assistant. We use this to kind of see if that helps us improve the quality. But for us, the focus is always on making sure that we have a human in the loop element who's validating the kind of work or the annotated data that's going back, right? And that's very important because none of these are perfect as well. But these are great examples, right? Like I really personally see DINO as being really a game changer, and it's going to really change the way a lot of the traditional CV development has happened. I'm talking about DINO V2, which got released recently. And there'll be other foundational models that get released pretty soon. Things keep evolving. I think the question is to how do you make sure that you're using the most appropriate one? Each one, of course, focuses on a certain area, and I think that's what we want to kind of make sure that we have this whole repertoire of models that we can pick and choose.
Got it. How do you see model acceleration? So just tying in what Segmind does with, of course, our API offering, and VoltaML as a library to kind of make the inferences faster. How important is it to kind of, speed up the inferences? Is it more of a cost issue or a user experience issue? How do you look at this space? Curious to know that.
So it's definitely, it's both, right? Cost is a very important factor, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the foundational models do suck up a lot of money. So you've got to make sure that you're handling it the right way. And I think especially, you and I were chatting a couple of days back, and I think your focus on making sure that you're having these various creative models available so that the end user could come and using a very standardized API front access any of these models. I'm pretty sure that you're offering the best in terms of the hardware offerings, and this basically allows content creators to build their to base their work on standardized templates, right? I think one of the biggest constraints for a developer is the fact that you work with model A and you do some development around it. Model B comes and then suddenly you have to start spending time, rewriting your application. So offering that standardized service, I think that's a great advantage for many of these creators. And also the fact that you're able to leverage the Volta offer highly what do you say,
optimized,
really fast model inferences. I think that's really important.
Got it. So just kind of going on the theme of synthetic data, of course, we spoke about how they're kind of useful to speed up annotations, improve models. But what are some of the challenges and limitations that you see of using synthetic data for fine tuning or training? The other day we were talking about model collapse. Like if you use the same data that the model has created, sometimes it just collapses. But what do you think are the limitations of using synthetic data for training and fine tuning?
So I think the biggest constraint would be the quality, right? Are you getting realistic data? Are you getting truly representative data? Are you taking care of all the bias that is inherent. I mean, we talked about model collapse. What is model collapse? A bunch of models playing telephone with each other, right? Model A gives out an output. Already the context has reduced. Model B takes that reduced context and gives another output, which is even more reduced in terms of its representation. So at some point, these things, unless you specifically monitor and account for it, will definitely come back to impact the performance. So I think, when you use generative AI, the biggest aspect that needs to be considered is, how representative is your data. And, you need to have guardrails to make sure that you are accounting for it, right? And in many cases, companies don't have the wherewithal to actually sit down and look at every aspect of class coverage, or, hey, is my data truly representative? So you need to work with other services to kind of understand your data better. So that's one aspect. And quite frankly, the second biggest aspect would be the legality. You have to be really clear, right, on what is the licensing of your model. For example, you can't use many of OpenAI models to train another model, right? So you have to be really clear about that. You have to, if you're looking at some diffusion model, are you really sure you're not infringing on somebody's copyright? So these are some of the areas where you really have to pay attention. And it's very important that you do that in the beginning, because this field is changing so dramatically that, the contracts and the business aspects change pretty quickly. And if you're not keeping your eye open for it, you could, have something illegal.
Yeah.
And I think the last area, which is a challenge, is essentially expert knowledge, right? You need to really understand, how these models work. How can you get the best of these models, right? And like you're doing that with, a lot of this host of diffusion models that you are hosting, right? You have a great sense of what model is best at what, and I'm pretty sure a customer comes to you and needs help, you can give that subject matter input, right? Saying that, hey, this is what is much more relevant for your use case.
Right.
So I think those are some of the aspects, and that, you really challenge this general use of synthetic data. But none of these are very unique to synthetic data. These come in different forms across industries. We need to make sure that we have the right guardrails here for these, for the work that we do here.
All right. Awesome. So those are all the questions that I had. So thanks so much, Sudeep. It was great talking to you. And I'll probably open it up to the audience that we have. If you have any questions, I think there's a Q&A section on Zoom. So we'll spend around 10-15 minutes here. If you have any questions, please leave them in the Q&A section. We already have 2 questions. Does iMerit do reinforcement learning from human feedback projects for any of the foundational models, such as OpenAI or Coher, etc.?
Yeah, so I can't really talk about specific customers, but yes, we do RLHF. And I think, that's definitely an area where we focus on. There are a lot of aspects to it. It's not just, having a bunch of people looking at data and saying, oh, this is better than that. You really need to get the right people looking at that data. Think of how you would have RLHF be applied for a medical model that you're developing versus, let's say, a fintech model. You really need to get the right people providing that feedback, and that's what we bring to the table. We get the right people. We make sure that you're getting the right set of experts who can give you the feedback that really helps improve your model.
Perfect. There's one more. How is iMerit different from annotator crowdsourcing platforms such as Toloka? Have you heard about it?
So I think the biggest difference is the fact that we don't crowdsource. So we have, all of the annotators that we have are members of our workforce. So that means that there is very strict quality control. And quite frankly, one of the biggest downsides of using crowd-sourced annotation is the fact that quality is always an issue, right? And it could be because of a multitude of factors. Even though it sounds simple, annotation is a pretty complex task, right? It is a knowledge-based task. You really need to understand what you're doing, and you need to make sure that you're carrying those lessons that you have learned across different projects that you work on. So that is an element which is not very strong with crowdsourced annotation.
Right.
And there's also the whole data governance part. We take our data security and governance extremely seriously, right? So customers come to us because we can guarantee them high quality SLAs,
Right.
as well as we also guarantee the data security. And for many of these customers, I mean, you're talking about self-driving car companies, data, they spend a lot of money on collecting data. They don't want that.
Very dear to them. Yeah. Having worked with you, I think I can second that. It's I think the data security at iMerit is pretty commendable and locked in. Also, I think it also depends on the kind of application. So let's say if you're building a medical AI application, you can't do crowdsourcing. I mean, it would not make sense. You need doctors, surgeons, etc. But if you're building something like Mid-Journey or something, which is a creator model, I think crowdsourcing could work
Exactly
with the right guardrails.
So there are different flavors to it. I think it's more about what is the risk appetite that you have, right? I mean, if you're willing to kind of if you're not working in a space which is where data security or even the kind of output that is generated is not very critical, then definitely you can leverage crowdsourced.
Awesome. Cool. I'll move on to the next question, and it's from Harish. Would AI replace human annotations in the near future?
As much as everyone says, yes, I don't think so. All right. What is going to happen is human annotators are going to change. All right. Human annotators are going to have to become subject matter experts, right? And that is something that is very clear given these advancements that we are seeing. There is still need for annotation. These foundational models are built on the work of a lot of expert human annotators across the world, right? There is no foundational model today that has been created without having some human element to it. Yes, the typical job role may change, but there is still a need for human annotators. So I don't see that going away. It's going to get transformed.
Right. I mean, the classic case I was reading about, of course, I think today Stack Overflow released their LLM. I think it's Overflow AI or something. But yeah, I mean, you created a model which kind of took 50 lakh questions from Stack Overflow and created that model. But for all the newer problems, it's again a model collapse scenario. Like if you don't have human annotators who are writing as humans on Stack Overflow, the model just collapse in a few years. Yep. So I think I can second that, and I think the need for annotators will still be there. It's just that what they do will kind of keep changing, drifting with the types of models.
Exactly.
The last question: does iMerit do synthetic data generation?
We do.
I think I lost you, Sudeep. Zed, can you hear him?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I was saying that we do use synthetic data. I can't get into specifics, but we definitely use it for a variety of use cases. We use it to improve how customers handle edge cases. We use it in terms of improving the bias and representation of data. So different use cases, but definitely synthetic data in different forms, right? Whether it's textual, whether it is image-based, definitely here to stay.
Got it. Awesome. So I don't have any more questions. So I'll probably conclude, and thanks everyone for joining in. Whoever is in India, I know it's pretty late, so and including you, Sudeep, thank you so much. It was lovely talking to you, and I hope to catch up with you soon and get an opportunity to work again with you.
Thank you, Rohit. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot for setting this up, and have a great evening. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. See you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.